The sun had just begun to rise over the quiet neighborhood when Claire pushed open the front door. Tired from her early morning shift at the bookstore, she enjoyed those peaceful hours when the world was still waking up, but today she only wanted to rest. The house was silent except for the faint hum of running water. She paused, realizing someone was in the shower. It surprised her because her husband, Mark, had left early for a business trip the previous night. That meant it could only be Ethan, her 20-year-old stepson, who had come home for summer break. Claire smiled faintly at the thought. Ethan had grown so quickly. The last time she had seen him for more than a few days was last Christmas. And even then, he barely spoke, buried in his phone and college life. He wasn't a bad kid, just quiet, thoughtful, the kind who never made trouble but always seemed to carry the world's weight in his eyes. She felt proud of him in her own way, though their bond was still a little fragile. He had accepted her after she married his father 3 years ago. But there was always that invisible wall between them, respectful, polite, but distant. She headed down the hallway, planning to grab her laundry basket from the bathroom next to Ethan's room. As she approached, she noticed the bathroom door was slightly ajar, steam curling out into the hall. She hesitated. The sound of water splashing echoed softly, and then a small thud, like someone dropping a soap bottle. Without thinking, Claire stepped closer and gently pushed the door. In that instant, her eyes caught a brief glimpse inside Ethan's back through the misted glass. His shoulders tensed in surprise. He turned halfway, startled, and before Claire could process anything, she quickly looked away and shut the door. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," she blurted out, her heart pounding. There was a pause, then Ethan's voice awkward, embarrassed, and quiet. "It's okay. I thought you were still at work." Claire backed away, her cheeks burning. She hadn't meant to intrude. It had been a simple mistake, an accident, but the moment felt strangely heavy, almost too intimate in its awkwardness. She hurried down the hall, pretending nothing had happened, but her pulse refused to calm down. She tried to shake off the thought, blaming the exhaustion from work. Still, the image of his startled expression lingered in her mind. When she reached her room, she sat on the bed, pressing her hands over her face. "It's fine," she whispered to herself. "It was nothing. Just an accident." But the house suddenly felt smaller, quieter, and full of something unspoken. A few minutes later, she heard his footsteps in the hallway. The sound made her tense instinctively. He moved into the kitchen, and after a moment, she followed, trying to act normal. Ethan stood by the counter, pouring himself a cup of coffee. His hair was still damp, his expression awkward but calm. When he saw her, he straightened up a little. "Morning," she said softly. "Hey," he replied, not quite meeting her eyes. The silence that followed was unbearable. Normally, Claire could talk her way through anything. She worked with people every day. After Albert now, she couldn't think of a single word that didn't sound strange. Finally, she forced a smile and reached for a mug. "Long night at work," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to walk in earlier. I didn't realize you were in there." Ethan nodded, staring down at his coffee. "Yeah, it's fine. No big deal." But the look on his face told her it wasn't fine. He wasn't angry, just uncomfortable. The way people get when they don't know how to handle something that shouldn't have happened. Claire wished she could go back 5 minutes and undo it all. The rest of the morning passed in uneasy silence. Ethan went out for a run, and Claire stayed behind, folding laundry and trying to pretend everything was normal. Yet every time she thought she'd moved past it, the memory flashed again: the door, the steam, the startled look in his eyes. It wasn't that she had seen anything inappropriate. It was simply the moment, raw, human, unguarded, that unsettled her. That afternoon, she sat by the window, sipping tea, watching the rain start to fall. She remembered the first time she met Ethan, how nervous she'd been, unsure if he'd ever accept her as part of the family. Mark had been patient, telling her Ethan just needed time. And he had grown warmer with her over the years, even protective in small ways. She had thought they'd finally reached a good place. Now, she worried this accident might change everything. When Ethan returned home later, soaked from the rain, Claire greeted him at the door with a towel. "Here," she said softly. "You'll catch a cold." He smiled awkwardly. Thanks. Their eyes met for a brief second, and in that quiet look, she saw a understanding, apology, and something else she couldn't quite name. It wasn't romantic or inappropriate. It was simply human. Two people embarrassed, trying to move past something they didn't mean to happen. Dinner that night was awkward. The television murmured softly in the background, and Mark's absence made the house feel even emptier. Claire cooked Ethan's favorite meal mac and cheese with roasted chicken, hoping to lighten the mood. He thanked her politely, but spoke little. She could sense he was overthinking to Dot as she cleared the table. She caught him watching her for a moment before he looked away. It wasn't strange, just hesitant. Like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Later, as Claire sat on the couch with a book, Ethan came out of his room and paused by the doorway. "Hey," he said quietly. About this morning, she looked up quickly. "Ethan, it's fine." "Really?" He nodded, his face serious. "Still, I just wanted to say I didn't mean to make things weird." Claire smiled gently. "You didn't. We both just had bad timing." That seemed to ease him. He gave a small nod and disappeared back into his room. Claire sighed, closing her book. She told herself it was over now, that everything was fine. But deep down, something had shifted, a faint awareness neither of them could quite explain. That night, as she lay in bed, listening to the sound of rain tapping against the windows, her thoughts wandered back to that moment in the hallway. She didn't know why it stayed with her, maybe because it reminded her of how fragile life's boundaries could be, how one tiny accident could change the way people saw each other. She wasn't angry or upset, just thoughtful. Ethan was growing into his own life, his own man. And perhaps that's what startled her most, the realization that time had moved faster than she realized. In another room, Ethan lay awake too, thinking about the same moment, the same awkward mistake. Neither of them spoke about it again, but that morning would stay quietly between them, shaping how they saw each other from that day forward. And as Claire finally drifted to sleep, one thought lingered in her heart. Sometimes, the most unexpected moments have the power to uncover what people truly feel if they don't yet understand it. The days after that awkward morning felt heavier than usual. The air in the house carried a silence that wasn't angry but full of hesitation. Claire noticed the change immediately. Ethan stopped coming down for breakfast, kept his door closed longer, and avoided eye contact whenever they crossed paths. She tried to tell herself it was nothing. That time would smooth things over. But the unease between them only grew. She filled her days with small routines, watering the garden, dusting shelves, cooking meals she wasn't hungry for. The quiet made her mind wander more than she wanted. She thought of her husband Mark, who was still away for work. He called every few nights talking about meetings, deadlines, and future plans. He never noticed the distance in her voice, never asked how things felt at home. When she hung up, the silence returned, echoing louder than before. Ethan, meanwhile, spent most of his time in his room or out jogging around the neighborhood. Claire often heard his footsteps leave early in the morning and return just before sunset. She wanted to talk to him, to clear whatever wall had formed. But every time she tried, her words froze. She didn't know how to begin. How do you bring up a moment you're both pretending didn't happen? One afternoon, Claire decided to bake cookies, something she hadn't done in months. She remembered Ethan once saying he liked the smell of chocolate chip cookies because it reminded him of his mom, Kay, who passed away when he was 10. She figured maybe it would make things feel warmer again. As the oven timer beeped, she heard soft footsteps behind her. Ethan stood there, hesitant but smiling faintly. "Smells good," he said. "Your favorite," she replied, trying to sound casual. He nodded. "Thanks." It was a small exchange, but it felt like progress. She handed him a cookie, and for the first time in days, he looked her in the eyes. They both smiled shyly but genuinely. It was enough to melt the ice, at least for a moment. Later that evening, the rain started again, gentle but steady. The house felt cozy under the sound of it. Claire sat on the couch reading a novel when Ethan appeared at the edge of the living room. He looked uncertain, holding a cup of tea in his hands. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked. She shook her head. "Of course not." They sat quietly, listening to the rain. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. After a few minutes, Ethan spoke, his voice quiet and careful. I wanted to say I'm sorry again. About that morning? I didn't mean to make things uncomfortable for you. Claire lowered her book and smiled gently. You don't need to apologize again, Ethan. It was just a mistake. Let's not keep replaying it. He looked down, fidgeting with his mug. I just didn't want you to think I'm weird or something. She chuckled softly, shaking her head. You're not weird. You're just human. Ethan smiled, relieved, but still unsure. It's just been awkward. I guess I didn't know how to face you after that. I get it, Claire said, her tone warm and motherly. But I promise it's fine. Life's full of awkward moments. We move on. Her calmness seemed to ease him. They both laughed lightly, and the tension that had filled the house for days began to fade. The sound of the rain filled the pauses between their words, soft and soothing. For the next few minutes, they freely talked about his classes, his friends, and how he was thinking of changing his major. Claire listened intently, nodding and asking questions. It had been so long since they'd had a real conversation. She realized how much she'd missed it when Ethan spoke. She noticed how mature his voice sounded now, deeper and more thoughtful. It reminded her of how quickly he was growing up. He wasn't a kid anymore. He was becoming a man with his own fears and hopes. She felt a wave of tenderness, not romantic, but deeply emotional. She cared for him not just as a stepson, but as someone she genuinely wanted to understand. As the clock ticked past 9, the lights flickered for a moment. The storm outside was growing stronger. Claire got up to check the windows, making sure they were locked. When she turned back, Ethan was still sitting there. Watching the rain through the glass, do you ever feel like you're stuck between who you were and who you're supposed to be? He asked suddenly. His question caught her off guard. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something familiar in his expression, a quiet loneliness she understood too well. Yes, she said softly. More often than you'd think. He nodded slowly, his gaze distant. It's strange. I thought growing up would make things easier, but sometimes I just feel ... lost. Claire sat back down beside him. Everyone feels that way at some point. It means you're growing, even if it doesn't feel like it. Ethan looked at her with a small smile. You sound like a teacher, she laughed. Maybe I missed my calling. For the first time in weeks, the air between them felt natural again. The awkwardness had faded, replaced by something warmer, more comfortable. It wasn't about that morning anymore. It was about two people finding a way to reconnect as the night went on. They kept talking, sometimes about small things, sometimes about deeper ones. Claire told him how she met his father, how scared she'd been to become a stepmother. Ethan listened carefully, asking questions she didn't expect. She found herself opening up more than she planned to, realizing that maybe he needed to hear the truth as much as she needed to speak it. When the storm finally began to quiet, Ethan stretched and stood up. Thanks for talking to me, he said softly. I didn't realize how much I missed this. Me too, she admitted. He smiled. Good night, Claire. Good night, Ethan. After he left, Claire sat in silence for a long time. The house was dark except for the soft glow of a single lamp. She felt a strange peace, mixed with something unspoken and emotion she couldn't quite name. It wasn't attraction. It was something more complicated, more human. She cared deeply about Ethan, and in that care there was warmth, sadness, and an unfamiliar tenderness. She thought about how different life had become since Mark started traveling more often. The house felt emptier, and in that emptiness, moments like this one seemed to matter more. She didn't want to misunderstand her feelings, but she couldn't deny that something about Ethan's quiet presence filled a void she hadn't realized was there. Before going to bed, she stood by the window watching the last drops of rain slide down the glass. She whispered to herself, it's just care. That's all. Yet deep down, she knew something was shifting inside her heart, something gentle, confusing, and real. In his room, Ethan lay awake too, thinking about their talk. He felt lighter, but also strangely aware of her kindness. It wasn't the kind of warmth he got from his friends or his father. It was different, deeper. Neither of them knew it then, but that quiet night, under the sound of rain and forgiveness, marked the beginning of a new understanding, one that would change the way they saw each other forever. The next weekend arrived quietly, carrying with it a heavy summer storm that rolled across the sky in deep rumbling waves. By evening, the rain was pouring down hard, turning the streets into silver rivers. The wind howled against the windows and thunder echoed through the small house. Claire stood by the kitchen sink, watching the flashes of lightning illuminate the backyard. She always found storms both terrifying and strangely beautiful. Ethan had been in his room most of the day, studying or pretending to. Since their late-night talk earlier that week, things had felt easier between them. They spoke more comfortably now, even laughed sometimes. But beneath that comfort, there was still something fragile, like walking on a thin bridge between friendship and something they couldn't quite define. As the storm intensified, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The entire house fell into darkness. Claire sighed softly, reaching for her phone to use its flashlight. "Of course," she murmured. She wasn't afraid of the dark, but she hated the silence that came with it. A moment later, she heard footsteps. Ethan appeared in the doorway, holding a small flashlight. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," she replied, smiling faintly. "Looks like the power's gone for a while." He nodded. "I found some candles in the drawer. Want me to light them?" "Please." They moved around the kitchen together, lighting candles and placing them on the table, the counter, the shelves. Soon the room glowed with a soft golden light, warm against the storm outside. Claire watched Ethan's face in the flickering flame, calm, thoughtful, a little older than his years. He had his father's eyes, but a gentleness that was entirely his own. When they finished, Claire suggested they sit in the living room. It was quiet, except for the steady rhythm of the rain and the distant roll of thunder. Ethan settled into the chair near the window while she sat on the couch, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. For a while, they said nothing. The kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable, just quiet and alive with unspoken thoughts. Then Ethan spoke softly. "I used to be scared of storms when I was a kid." Claire looked at him with a smile. "You don't seem like the type who'd admit that." He chuckled lightly. "Yeah, well, I guess I trusted you enough to say it." His words made her heart warm. "What helped you get over it?" she asked. "My mom," he said after a pause. "She used to sit with me by the window and tell me that thunder was just the sky talking to the earth. She said every storm ends with something beautiful, fresh air, new light, or a rainbow." Claire smiled sadly. "She sounds like she was a wonderful woman." "She was," Ethan said quietly. "Sometimes I forget her voice, though. That's what scares me the most." Claire felt a sting in her chest. "You'll never forget her completely. She's part of you. The way you care about things, that's her." He looked at her for a long moment, eyes soft in the candlelight. "You sound like her sometimes," he said. The words made Claire pause. She didn't know what to say. Compliment? Confession? She wasn't sure. So she just smiled, though her heart was beating a little faster. Another flash of lightning filled the room, followed by a sharp clap of thunder. The sound made her jump slightly, and Ethan laughed. "Guess you're not over your fear either," he teased. She laughed too, shaking her head. "Maybe not." When the laughter faded, the silence returned, deeper this time. The storm outside raged louder, but inside the candlelight felt calm, almost protective. Claire adjusted the blanket and noticed Ethan shiver slightly. Without thinking, she stood and draped part of the blanket over his shoulders. "Here," she said softly. "You'll catch a chill." He looked up at her, surprised but grateful. Their hands brushed briefly, and the small touch sent a strange rush through her chest, warm, fleeting, and confusing. She pulled back quickly and sat down again, pretending nothing happened. They both stared at the candles, neither speaking for a while. The moment hung between them like a secret. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice low. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, like You wake up one day and realize everything around you is fine, but you still feel like something's missing. You can't tell what, but it's just not there. Claire looked at him thoughtfully. Yes, she said softly. More often than you'd think. He nodded slowly, his gaze distant. I feel that way a lot. Everyone says college is supposed to be the best time of your life, but I just feel lost sometimes. Claire leaned forward, her voice calm. You're not lost, Ethan. You're just trying to find your way. It's part of growing up. And it's okay to feel confused. We all do. Her tone was steady, almost soothing. Ethan looked at her again, something vulnerable in his expression. How do you deal with it? She smiled faintly. I remind myself that every day doesn't have to be perfect. Sometimes surviving the storm is enough. Ethan's lips curved into a small smile. You always know what to say. Not always, she replied. But I try. The storm began to quiet outside, though the room remained dim and warm from the candles. For a moment, Claire forgot about everything, her loneliness. The distance in her marriage, the awkward memory that had started all of this. She just felt present, sitting beside someone who needed comfort as much as she did. Then the power suddenly flickered back on for a split second before dying again, plunging them back into darkness. The sudden silence made them both laugh softly. Guess we're stuck like this for a while, Ethan said. That's all right, she replied, her voice gentle. Sometimes it's nice when the world slows down. The candles flickered again, casting golden shadows across the walls. Claire glanced at Ethan and caught him watching her, not with discomfort, but with quiet understanding. Their eyes met, and in that look, there was something neither could explain: respect, connection, a shared loneliness, finding light in each other's company. For a moment, they didn't look away. The sound of the rain filled the space between them. It wasn't romantic, but it was deeply human, two hearts quietly recognizing something familiar in each other. Then, a loud crack of thunder shook the house, and one of the candles went out. The room dimmed, and their spell broke. Claire exhaled softly, standing up. I'll check the windows again, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. Okay? When she returned, he had already gathered the candles and placed them together on the coffee table, their small flames dancing together. Looks better this way, he said. She smiled. It does. They sat side by side again, silent but peaceful. Eventually, the storm outside began to fade, replaced by the soft sound of dripping rain. The clock ticked quietly, marking the passing of an evening neither of them would forget. When Claire finally stood to go to bed, Ethan whispered, "Thanks for staying up with me." She paused by the doorway and smiled. "Anytime, Ethan. Good night, Claire." As she walked to her room, her heart felt strangely full. That night hadn't been about apologies or awkwardness, it had been about honesty. About two people finding comfort in the middle of a storm. And as she drifted to sleep, one thought echoed softly in her mind. Sometimes, even in darkness, connection can feel like light. By the next morning, the storm had cleared, leaving the sky washed in soft sunlight. The air smelled fresh, the grass sparkled with dew, and the whole neighborhood seemed calmer after the long night of thunder and rain. Claire woke early, feeling rested but thoughtful. The memories of the night before lingered in her mind, the candles, the laughter, the quiet honesty between her and Ethan. Nothing wrong had happened, yet something had changed. It wasn't attraction, not romance, but a quiet awareness of how deeply two people could understand each other without words. When she walked into the kitchen, Ethan was already there, standing by the counter and pouring coffee. He looked up when she entered, his usual shy smile appearing for a brief moment. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied, pulling her robe tighter as she approached. "You beat me to it today," he chuckled. "Couldn't sleep much. Kept thinking about last night's storm. Kind of peaceful after it ended." Claire nodded. "Yeah, it felt different somehow." He hesitated before replying. "It was nice. Talking like that. I don't usually open up like that to anyone." She smiled gently. "I'm glad you did, Ethan. You don't have to carry everything alone. You're allowed to feel lost sometimes." He nodded, looking down at his coffee as if her words meant more than he could admit. For a few moments, they just stood there in comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. The morning light poured through the window, painting golden streaks across the counter. It felt warm, steady, and peaceful. After breakfast, Claire began cleaning up the living room, gathering leftover candles, and straightening the blankets they'd used. The house smelled faintly of wax and rain. Ethan joined her, helping pick up things without being asked. It was something small, but Claire noticed. He wasn't doing it out of obligation. He simply wanted to help, as they worked side by side. Claire felt a quiet realization forming in her heart. For so long, she had been trying to fill the emotional distance her marriage left behind. Mark was kind but distracted, always somewhere else in his mind, always chasing another business trip, another project. Ethan's presence had reminded her what it felt like to truly connect with someone, even if that connection was unexpected. When the living room was finally tidy again, Ethan sank onto the couch with a sigh. "Feels weird without the storm," he said. "Like the house is too quiet." Claire smiled. "Sometimes quiet is good. It means you can breathe again." He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You're right." The day moved peacefully. Claire went about her chores, and Ethan spent time reading on the porch. Every now and then their paths crossed, and they exchanged small smiles or simple words. The tension that had once filled the house was gone. In its place was something soft, mutual respect, calm, and understanding. Later that afternoon, Mark called. Claire talked with him briefly, updating him about the storm and how they'd managed without power. He sounded distracted as usual, cutting the call short because of another meeting. When she hung up, she sat quietly for a few moments, staring at the empty screen. Ethan walked by and noticed her distant expression. "You okay?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Yeah, just tired of long-distance conversations, I guess." He didn't pry. Instead, he sat across from her, his tone sincere. "He's lucky to have you. You know?" Claire's smile turned bittersweet. "Sometimes I wonder if he remembers that." There was no bitterness in her voice, just honesty. Ethan nodded silently, unsure how to respond. They sat like that for a while, the air filled with gentle stillness, as the sun began to set. The golden light spread across the living room. Claire made tea, and Ethan joined her again, sitting on the other end of the couch. Neither of them spoke much. They didn't need to. It was the kind of peace that came after a storm, quiet, fragile, but comforting. Then Ethan broke the silence softly. "Claire, can I ask you something?" "Of course," she said. He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Do you ever think that people come into your life for a reason? Like, not just by chance, but to help you see something you couldn't before?" She looked at him with gentle eyes. "Yes, I do. Sometimes people show up just when you need them the most, even if you don't realize it at first." He smiled slightly. "I think that's what you did for me." Her heart softened. "And maybe you did the same for me." The words hung between them, sincere and simple. There was no hidden meaning, no confusion, just gratitude and understanding. It was the kind of emotional connection that didn't need to be defined. As night fell, the sky outside turned a deep blue. The air was calm, the house warm. Claire and Ethan sat quietly for a while longer, watching the last light fade through the window. Finally, Claire stood, placing her empty cup on the table. "I think I'll head to bed," she said. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Ethan nodded. "Thanks for everything, Claire." "Really?" she smiled. "You don't have to thank me, Ethan. Just keep being kind to yourself and to others." "That's enough," he smiled back. "I'll try." That night, as Claire lay in bed, her mind drifted over everything that had happened in the past few days. The awkward moment, the silence, the storm, the conversations that followed. Life had a strange way of teaching lessons through accidents. What started as an embarrassing misunderstanding had turned into something meaningful. An honest connection between two people who needed understanding more than anything else. She realized that love could exist in many forms. Not just romantic love. but the kind that heals, the kind that teaches, the kind that reminds you you're not alone. Ethan had reminded her what empathy felt like. She had reminded him what family could be. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows again. Claire woke early, hearing the faint sound of Ethan's guitar from the porch. It was soft, clumsy, but beautiful. She stood by the doorway for a moment, watching him. He didn't see her there, but she smiled quietly, proud of the man he was becoming. When he finally noticed her, he grinned. "Sorry, didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't?" she said. "That was lovely." He shrugged shyly. "Just something I'm working on." "Well," she said warmly, "keep working on it. You're good." They shared one last smile before the morning fully began. The air felt lighter, the world quieter. Whatever tension had existed before was gone completely now, replaced by genuine care and trust. Claire realized something then: home wasn't just a place or a marriage. It was a feeling. It was the warmth that came when two people learned to see each other without judgment. Ethan had helped her remember that as she prepared breakfast. She thought to herself that sometimes the people who enter your life unexpectedly are the ones who bring you back to yourself. That morning, as laughter slowly filled the kitchen again, Claire finally felt at peace. She didn't think about the awkward day that had started it all anymore. What mattered was what it had led to: healing, forgiveness, and a new understanding between them. And as she watched Ethan smile over his coffee, sunlight glowing across the room, she realized that the home she had been searching for wasn't something to build. It was already right there. In the simple kindness of that quiet moment,